Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. We're from The Niche Cache, theniche-cache.com, where you can read about Aotearoa sport, got all sorts of yarns you can digest. All the yarns on the website, they do skew towards the deeper dives, the previews, all just the basic information you need. So we've got Warriors playing rugby league on Friday night against the Rabbitohs. We got White Ferns in Sri Lanka. We got Tall Ferns in their Asia Cup. There's preview yarns for all three of those things on our website at the moment. So you can check in and just learn a bit about those respective teams and where they're at ahead of or during their sporting action. We got plenty of other content you can enjoy on our website, theniche-cache.com. Also got the Patreon that you can support us directly, and the Substack. So if you do want to donate or support the Niche Case straight up the guts, do so via Patreon or Substack. We drop an extra podcast for those feeds each week prior to the variety show. So check that out. Make sure you do check in with the variety show coming off the weekend, where we just try to cover as much Kiwi sport as we can. Then we pop up here on a Thursday and do a big old Kiwi sporting yarn. Also part of the Substack, free subscription is our email newsletter every Monday and Friday. That is pretty epic. You need to sign up to get that. All the niche case sent straight to you, as well as yarns written specifically for the Substack email dispatch. And then you can upgrade to a paid subscription if you are feeling extra generous. Then you get access to the podcast. Patreon, just a straight up donation platform with access to that extra podcast as well. Plenty of Kiwi sporting stuff to discuss. But let's get a bit of mindfulness first and foremost.
Yeah, Mr. Alexander Pope, who said, "Just as the twig is bent, the tree is inclined." Which I guess to translate that an extra 300 years into the future would be more like, just as the twig is bent, so will the tree be inclined, I guess.
So if the twig bends, the tree is going to want to bend.
If the twig is bent, the tree is going to be bent as well when it grows bigger. It's going to keep growing the way that it started out. The thing it began with, you started off with a little bit of an incline with the twig. With the, I guess, even twig, let's call it the sapling, the little whatever, is gonna continue to grow that way. The way it started out, it's the way it's gonna keep going, and then you're gonna end up with a leaning Tower of Pisa kind of tree. Your avocado tree is gonna be on a lean. Actually, that's not such a bad idea for picking them, to be fair. So
as long as it's leaning towards you, then you can pick those avos.
Yeah, the stuff
easier.
On the top is a bit harder.
Basically, small things become big things, and small
down
things,
the line, yeah, pretty much.
Small things are small things until they become big things. Then they're a big thing, and you need to deal with them. So if you can manage those small things, if you can get that twig sorted out early on, honkadori, no worries in the future. I have a couple of quick hitters here just to touch on. The first is you've published your Stephen Adams Quotable Edition, which is an annual activity for yourself. You go through and find the funkiest quotes from Scuba Stephen Adams. I have been pondering about this because Stephen Curry in New Zealand, that is basically Stephen Curry. But you can't go to America and be like, "Hey, yo, Stephen Curry." Like, that's not going to work. You got to call him Steph. You got to call him Stephen. Whereas in New Zealand, he's just Stephen. And then you've got Stephen Adams, who is also Stephen spelt differently with a V as opposed to a PH. So not sure what that means. I've just been thinking about it a wee bit. However, I am curious, what is your favorite Stephen Adams quote from the past 12 months?
Well, just to add to your Stefan, Stefan, I don't know, thing as well. One of Stephen Adams' nicknames that dates back to before he went to America in the first place is Tips. They call him Tips. Because it's a good sounding name for a big man, right? He's going to go up and get those offensive rebounds. Tips is a good one, but also like where it actually came from is it's short for Tipene, which is the Tadeo translation of Stephen, which is why that's why he's known as Tips. But
Wait,
my
wait, 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 wait,
favorite
wait, wait,
quote
wait, 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 wait. Why don't they call him Fun?
for Funaki,
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know. Like maybe that's another one. We'll just add that into the list.
Or Funk.
In America,
Funky.
they always call him Stevo. Everyone's calling. I think It seems like it was a Russell Westbrook thing, called him Stevo, and then because Westbrook did it, everyone else did. But you know, it's
I
stuck at New Orleans and Memphis. So
like I can draw a line between Funaki and Funky. It's not quite
yeah,
fun and
yeah,
Funaki,
yeah.
but it's there, old Funky Adams. There you go.
Funky Adams. It's you know what? That's going to pop up in the articles next year as well, I reckon. But my favorite quote, I went through again when you tipped me off to this. So I thought like, let's do this properly. I'll go through and see what's the one that stuck out. And there's obviously a nice array, not as many this year as there usually are. I actually didn't end up hardly cutting anything from the stuff from the first draft, which I normally end up doing to keep it nice and tidy. But of course, he missed half the season, so he wasn't playing for half a season. He wasn't also talking for half a season. No one was interviewing him or getting quotes or post game media or stuff. But of course, for the first half of the season, some brilliant stuff, and there was some good lines in there of the humorous type. There's some good lines in there of this sort of like patient basketball explanation stuff, which is also great. I went for something somewhere in the middle, which is after an 11.23 rebound game against the Sacramento Kings. It was part of that stretch where he was like part of a 4-game stretch where he had 76 rebounds combined over those 4 games. He was unreal at that point. And he did a sort of post-game interview after the Sacramento game where he had 23 rebounds. 13 of them were offensive rebounds. I think that's an equal career high for rebounds. It was definitely a career high for offensive rebounds for him. They asked him, how'd you get so many offensive rebounds? And he responded, the quote, we sucked at shooting. They kept missing shots, so I went and got him. It's like there's a few different versions in that quotable this year of him sort of talking about his offensive rebounding strategies, and that was the most succinct one. And he's basically just like, I just went and got him. We sucked at shooting, they kept missing shots, so I went and got him. It's a simple sport.
I was hoping for something a bit more borderline mindfulness, but you came in with some actual basketball, which is good. From old Funky Adams. Another little note that I've got here. We're obviously tracking the Ashes for the love of cricket. And I have noticed a bit of a theme, bit of a trend. And of course, we do know that England have lost 2 of their last 3 tests. Like, that is a fact. And the first of those tests that they lost was in Wellington against the Kiwis, against the Black Caps. The Black Caps won by 1 run. Fantastic test cricket. England didn't save test cricket. Test cricket is pure ahi in Aotearoa. It's an amazing spectacle. Kiwis love test cricket, and test cricket does not need saving in Aotearoa. So what the Black Caps did is they just defeated England by 1 run. In that test, the Black Caps bowled 1 no ball. England bowled 10 no balls. So there's a difference of 9 runs. So if England didn't bowl 10 no balls, they may have won that test match. But of course, they love a no ball. The first Ashes test, Australia won by 2 wickets. Australia bowled 4 no balls. England bowled 23 no balls. So it's like England love a no ball, but is Bazball just about bowling no balls that then impact your results?
Probably not only about that, but it seems that that's a pattern that's coming through. I don't know. Maybe they need to pick more decent spinners and give them some deep overs. And spinners tend not to overstep. I guess when you got a pace bowling dominant group, that is something you have to at least be aware of. But then the Black Caps have a pace bowling dominant group, and they don't seem to bowl lots of no balls. So
Yeah, the
yeah, I don't
makeup
know,
of the
a
the
bit
makeup of
reckless.
the makeup of the bowling attack has no impact at all. It's your
Well, it does
attention.
if one guy's bowling the majority of those no balls, but I don't know. I haven't checked to see if
Yeah,
that's the
like that's
case.
not a relevant point here. It's about attention to detail. It's about focus. It's about
Yes.
being in the zone for Test cricket, and like those numbers. There's a wide enough disparity in those numbers that if England didn't bowl so many no balls, they might have won both those matches. But um, a lot of no balls just is aligned with not necessarily baseball, but a lot of their preparation stuff. Like, is the part of baseball is like less hard mahi before the test. Like when they came to New Zealand for that test series, they were playing golf down in Queenstown. It's been a similar build up for the Ashes. Don't play so much cricket. We're just going to have fun, have a little giggle, and then we're going to go out and bowl a lot of no balls because we haven't really been practicing to that intensity. So it is just something to track in the second test of the Ashes. If England are going to bowl 20 odd no balls again, they're probably going to lose. One team. You got something to say?
Well, I was just thinking that this does tie in a little bit with that mindfulness thing as well, doesn't it? Because what you're saying does sound a lot like what starts off as a small issue becomes a big issue if you lose a test by 1 run and you bowled 9 more no balls than the other team. And it's one of those things where it's like they're so focused. The baseball thing, it's like it's it's that saving test cricket thing. A lot of this isn't coming from the team. Like it's coming from media around the team, but the team don't do anything to put those flames out, do they? Like they're happy for people to say this about them. And even when they lose, they're coming off that game in Wellington talking about what a great spectacle it was for the fans and everything, and they're all happy even though they've been defeated like that. It's very big picture thing, and if you are very big picture thinking, you do miss those the wonky twig in the ground that's going to grow up to be an avocado tree falling over.
Yeah, there's a different vibe with the Aotearoa Warriors. The Aotearoa Warriors have a lot of attention to detail. They've got a lot of great systems in place. Everything is humming, and they face the South Sydney Rabbitohs Friday night in Auckland at Mount Smart. We got a New South Wales Cup game prior to that, also playing against the Rabbitohs. I have been pondering like two different estuaries of Warriors thoughts, because there's a lot of like simplification. Actually, what I'm doing is simplifying someone else's simplification. So I don't want to like poo-poo the simplification because my end thought is a simplification. But there's a lot of like why are the Warriors so good right now? Oh, it's Andrew Webster, it's the coach, it's this, it's recruitment, it's the players in career best form. And I just keep coming back to the Warriors are based at home. I think we talked about this on the Patreon podcast earlier in the week, and then I just kept thinking about, I'm like, the biggest difference between the Warriors now and the Warriors last year is they are operating on an even playing field. And I keep thinking, like, if you're running a 100-meter race and your starting line is 10 meters behind everyone else, you're going to lose. And that's what the Warriors were doing for 3 years. 2020, 2021, 2022, they were based in Australia, and it's hard to win games when you're just battling like to roll out NRL caliber energy, intensity, and vigor, which I don't think anyone can blame the Warriors for losing games during the pandemic when they're living in Australia. And Tohu Harris is living away from his family. We know Sean Johnson, the impact that had on his family. And we can look at some of the recruits. Shans Nickel Clockstad and Marata Niokore aren't signing with the Warriors if they were based in Australia. Like, that's not happening. And you go and you can compare that to some of the players the Warriors did sign during the pandemic. They only signed because they were based in Australia. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, 2020 to 2022 Warriors, there's nothing to take from it. It's just a black hole. You can't compare what the Warriors are doing now to what they were doing in the pandemic and say, like, a different way of framing it. I've got few ways to frame it. Another way of framing it, like, yeah, Andrew Webster, fantastic coach. We'll get into some of the footy stuff in a jiffy, but what's if Nathan Brown or Stacey Jones was coaching this team after they returned to Aotearoa? Like, I don't think Nathan Brown is a great coach. I don't know. Stacey Jones seems more like an assistant coach, but that is like a major difference. We're judging Andrew Webster's coaching in a situation where the whole Warriors organization is back at home. So the idea of comparing this Warriors team to last year, which is everywhere, it's what are the changes the Warriors have made? What are you doing differently? We're back in Aotearoa, you know? Like, the pandemic was extremely difficult to win NRL games. And another way of framing it is you look at the Reece Walsh situation, had to eat some humble kai about the whole Reece Walsh thing. He's a fantastic player, high energy. He's got high standards on the field, and he's a very energetic person. He's a very just outgoing, vibrant.
Just ask Patrick Carrigan.
Yeah, well, hold your horses. So for 2 seasons, Reece Walsh was doing that thing. Now, you got to imagine you're a Warriors player and you've been based in Australia for a couple of years. You're kind of over the whole experience because it's hard to win games when you're starting from behind the starting line, when you're not operating from an even playing field. It's hard to win games when you are blatantly disadvantaged compared to other teams. No home advantage at all, let alone the other factors. So you're halfway through last season and you're trying to deal with Reece Walsh. You're already over it. You're already like, just get me back to Aotearoa. Just get me back to take me to next season already. Like, we're over this. We're over this whole experience of the pandemic black hole, and you've got Reece Walsh barking at you. Compare that to the Broncos. The Broncos, like the whole Reece Walsh thing that's been on replay the whole week. The Broncos can keep a lid on Reece Walsh. He swore at the ref or whatever, who cares? But you can see the Broncos players kind of big brothering Reece Walsh in that situation because there are foundations of culture and mana and leadership, and everyone's there playing with the same energy levels. They can contain Reece Walsh. If Reece Walsh was doing that in the Warriors this year, I think the Warriors senior players would be able to contain Reece Walsh and not let it overboil, because there were stages last season where you could see Reece Walsh creating issues in the team because he's barking and he's operating at this like Super Saiyan level of energy where the rest of the Warriors are like, bruh, we're over this. That is nothing like, yeah, you can make some observations about Reece Walsh, but that I use that to explain the mindset of the Warriors. Because imagine you're already over like you've been working all week and you've got this hyper energetic Super Saiyan type of character barking and ripping and doing all sorts of crazy shit. And you're like, bro, I just want to go home.
Yeah, just shut up, will you?
Yeah.
Done.
Now it's all different for the Warriors. And so it's just a few different ways of portraying this idea. Like, the biggest change for the Warriors is being back in New Zealand. And I do reflect on the pandemic era as just a straight up black hole. You can't compare what the Warriors are doing this year to anything they were doing during the pandemic because of the disadvantages. Because the Warriors were literally sucked into a pandemic black hole. How are you supposed to win NRL games doing that? Andrew Webster has done a fantastic job at riding the wave of returning to Aotearoa. Andrew Webster didn't start the wave. Andrew Webster is not responsible for this wave. Andrew Webster hopped on the wave and added his, like, he's controlling the energy of the wave, and that's where we come into the Warriors versus Rabbitohs, because I'm enjoying a lot of the Warriors footy. There's a lot going on. I put a clip up earlier in the week about Dylan Walker's shape involvements, and like one of them he's running a decoy. The other one he's throwing a pass to Fanua Blake. The other one he's throwing a pass out the back of shape. And there's just a whole lot of things like that happening where you're like, this is interesting footy. This is exciting, but it's also, I think a lot of people are learning about rugby league from how the Warriors are playing. And this game against the Rabbitohs is going to be really interesting because the Rabbitohs don't have a lot of form. They have lost, I think it was 4 out of their last 5. And all of those games they've lost by conceding over 30 points. So in the variety show, I highlighted how the Warriors have scored 30 points in 3 games in a row. The Rabbitohs, they concede more than 30 points over the last few weeks. And they had a win over the Titans, and the Titans scored 28 points. And you would know, the Dragons, they beat the Rabbitohs, and now, sport mathematics, the Warriors smoked the Dragons, and the Rabbitohs are coming them out smart. It's a tricky, I think the Rabbitohs are a good footy team, but there's not a lot of form there, and it's going to be a very interesting matchup.
Yeah, seems like a safe bet with the old with the overs on the Warriors scoring there. Then, if that's the case, but then NRL is weird. You know, things swing around pretty quickly. But that I found the coaching stuff you're saying there really interesting because there's an undeniable impact that Andrew Webster has had on the Warriors, and his fingerprints, I guess, are there, and some of that shape you're talking about, and the way they do seem to have been improving as it goes along. It would stack up that's like a coach. The more time you have with a new coach, the more he's going to be able to implement things like this and build off what they've achieved to this point and continue to do that. And I think with a good coach, it's not the first season in charge where you see the best of them. That's just something that tends not to be the case. Of course, it wouldn't be the case, which makes this really interesting that they're sitting like 5th on the ladder or whatever it is at this point with a genuine, frankly, they should make the top 8 from here. They're one of the 8 best teams in the league. That doesn't mean they will. Who knows what will happen over the rest of the season, but that's absolutely something to play for right now, which just hasn't been the case for this franchise for a few years. And it's almost like a freebie year in that way, because it's like Webster is going to, whatever they're building towards, they're going to be better at it next year than they are this year, and probably better the year after that as well, on top of where they are right now. It's a funky thing. It's also like it's a good lesson about, because if he had been hired 2 years ago, we probably wouldn't have seen the same impact for the reasons you highlighted before. It was a dead end job at that point because of what the Warriors were up to with the pandemic handicap there. He was hired at the perfect time, but he's also clearly a good coach. Like he's hired on the upswing, which is exactly when they were already going to get a boost from getting to play home games again. That was already going to be a factor. And they added a good coach on top of that. It's perfect timing for a coach to be getting a gig like that. Like absolutely perfect time. You can't ask for better than that to have some kind of situation like that where the team is going to be getting a boost regardless of what you do. It's just going to help you ease into that job better. And then also he has had an instant impact, which is like a double banger because it's two things like both spurring each other onwards to make the Warriors into a better team, which is funky, but it's also like the best of Andrew Webster will be yet to come as a coach, like as he gets more time with the team. So I don't know. That's a weirdly positive trajectory to say, but it also is just a good thing to show. Like an equally good coach hired in the wrong time is probably not going to be successful. Like it's just timing and fit in these things is so important. And and this kind of stuff. And Webster has come around, like he's done his what he's been there to do. He's done that perfectly, but also the things outside of his control just lined up nicely for this to be a successful start to his tenure with the Warriors as well.
Yeah, I don't know what happens like when you go into a black hole. Can't say from
No
experience
one's
or anything.
been in and out
Yeah, like we
and been
don't know
able to
too much
report
about
back
the old
yet.
black holes in outer space, but maybe you go into the black hole, then you get shot out the other side, and you get Andrew Webster as a coach, and you build into the future on a absolute tidal wave. Like I cannot say this strong enough. On an absolute tidal wave of rugby league in Aotearoa. That like the Aotearoa Warriors diary this week was about Aotearoa loves rugby league, and that is happening. And it goes beyond the Warriors because we've seen last year there was an Aotearoa Kiwis team with no Warriors in the team. You can look at all the players who are entering Australian clubs. You can see what the Warriors are going to do with all their junior teams. Like rugby league in the pandemic was actually kind of thriving despite the challenges that every sport had. And right now, this is just kind of the start. So keep an eye on that. But as far as the Warriors versus Rabbitohs go, it will be interesting how the Warriors defend Rabbitohs' shape because the Rabbitohs have very good attacking shape. No Latrell Mitchell, but you still got Cody Walker and Lachlan Ilias in the halves, Cameron Murray in the middle. Just a good Rabbitohs team, and this is going to be a test of the Warriors' defense and how they're able to stop the Rabbitohs going to their shape scoring opportunities. Usually that starts in the middle, though. Same with how the Warriors score their points, because if they're scoring their points on the wing, that starts in the middle. That starts with passing through the middle, getting the footy to the outside where you've got the space. And part of controlling the middle, I think Adam Whenua, Blake Tohu, Harris, and Dylan Walker might be the three best forwards in this game. Like Whenua Blake's got very powerful carries. He's got a very funky passing game as well. Like his passing game is more like Josh Schuster, where it's like you can't read what kind of pass Whenua Blake is going to make. Even when he dummies short but goes out the back, it's just a flick of the wrist. There's no movement to telegraph where Adam Whenua Blake is going to pass the ball. And he does a lot less passing than Tohu, Harris, and Dylan Walker. But the passes Adam Whenua Blake makes are so effective because there's a bit of pizzazz to them. Let alone how he's running the footy, let alone the fact that he hasn't missed a tackle for like 4 games in a row. Tohu Harris and Dylan Walker, their impact speaks for itself. Tohu Harris is the absolute mantis in every aspect of footy. And Dylan Walker's impact has been well stated throughout the niche case this year. I think those 3 forwards can be the best forwards on the paddock, and if they are, the Warriors will win. So I think that's a major area for the Warriors to watch out for with the Warriors, because the only player like I see of the same caliber for the Rabbitohs is Cameron Murray, and I don't even think he's in like that great a form right now. There could be a size advantage for the Rabbitohs forward pack with Burgess coming off the bench. Shaq Mitchell's big. Davey Moali's pretty big. Hamesale Tatola, they're big units as well. So that could be an area that the Warriors have a smaller, more mobile forward pack. However, the Warriors are also getting Mitchell Barnett back, and he is psycho. Like Dallin Watene-Zelezniak, Marcelo Montoya, they run like psychos. Mitchell Barnett is a footy psycho. And he is going to hurt someone in the Rabbitohs team. I made a joke about old Molo getting sin bin for the Dragons. Upon reflection, given some other circumstances, I think that was a bit of a... I'd like to apologise for that joke because I did have a moment of reflection about Francis Molo and his ill discipline. However, Marata Niokore and Mitchell Barnett, they're kind of guaranteed for sin bins at the moment. I think Niokore is more guaranteed of a sin bin than Molo, so I do need to again take some humble pie, some humble Kai there. But that's how Mitchell Barnett plays, so I'm all for it against the Rabbitohs. Another small detail to watch out for in the Warriors' attacking shape is Shan's Nickel Krokstad is kind of, when you get into good ball, when you get down the opposition's end, Nickel Krokstad is always popping up on the right. And Watane Zelesniak, he's scoring those tries because of Nickel Krokstad passing to Berry or passing directly to Watane Zelesniak. And what usually happens is Sean Johnson, he plays, he's not first receiver because the Warriors do so much passing in the middle. But it basically works where Sean Johnson plays the middle playmaking role. And then you got Luke Metcalf on the left, Nickel Krokstad on the right. And again, I think that is quite similar to the Panthers, where Webster came from. Panthers, they have Luai on the left, Dylan Edwards on the right, and Nathan Cleary operating in the middle. So, and again, similar to the Panthers, Nickel Krokstad is extremely busy in the Warriors' half when they have the ball. He's just running through the middle. But then when the Warriors get into attacking position, Nickel Krokstad goes out to the right edge and Metcalf's on the left edge. So something to watch out for. Warriors taking on the Rabbitohs. What was, like, do you have an observation about the Warriors? Like, just a short, concise observation about the Warriors from your Dragons game, from the Dragons loss, to share about ahead of this Rabbitohs game?
Well, you said, like, if Harris, Walker, and Fanua Blake are the three best forwards on the park, they'll probably beat the Rabbitohs. Well, they were the three best forwards on the park last week, and they smoked the Dragons by 30 odd points or whatever it was. So that stacks up. That's particularly because the Dragons did have a good win against the Rabbitohs not that long ago, as you also mentioned. So, yeah, I mean, they're a good, well-rounded team. Like, they're the kind of team that don't seem to have the obvious weakness to target. They don't make errors. They kick really well. They can break you through the middle. They can also spread the ball wide and score. Nickel Krokstad is a bloody phenomenon. The way he just pops up in the right spots and influences stuff. Like, they're also really fun to watch at the moment. Like, there's a great energy about them, which is partly in how they're playing. Like, they've obviously had three games in a row where they've really found a new level in terms of scoring and being able to, particularly in the second halves of I think all those games, definitely the two most recent ones, where they've really just got a roll on and gone for it and just kept on going for it, and, like, case in point, that Raiders game where Johnson got hit in the face and then goes off, and then he comes back on when he didn't need to come back on, and then aggressively attacks an intercept and scores a try at the end there. Like, they're playing fun, and it's always fun to watch teams that can operate it quite, like, because they're doing some tricky stuff too. It's not like they're just doing simple things. It's that shape stuff you're talking about before. They're doing some nice things there, and that's always enjoyable to watch that done at a high level. But it's also the I don't know, the vibe. It's the confidence in the group. It's like everyone is they're having fun. They're not just fun to watch. The players are enjoying what they're doing. Like, there's smiles on their faces, and it is a stark contrast to what we've seen in the last couple of years. And it's great to see, to be honest. It's great to see whenever that's the case anywhere,
I don't think anyone was having fun during the pandemic.
Certainly not like this.
So, like, that's the biggest difference between last year and this year. Is, like, you're in a fun environment, which starts with being back in Aotearoa. This is a massive weekend of NRL footy. Dragons versus Sharks is tonight. That's not one of the massive games. Storm versus Panthers. That is a massive game. Storm, Remus Smith. The whole right edge is Kiwi NRL. Asafa Solomona, edge forward, Jerome Hughes, half, Remus Smith, Will Warbrick. Alec MacDonald, he's gone straight back on the bench for the Storm. He's a hard, grafting middle forward originally from Auckland. Watch out for Alec MacDonald off the bench for the Storm. They're up against the Panthers. Panthers have Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris, the best starting prop rotation in the NRL. Also got Raiders versus Titans. Raiders there, it's Matthew Tomoko, Joseph Tapine, Jordan Rapana, all those lads coming up against the Titans team that had a victory over the Broncos last week. Kieran Foran, Isaac Liu, Harty, veterans of that team. You've also got Aaron Clark from Manurewa. He's coming off the bench. Cowboys versus Tigers. Griffin Neem is back in the Cowboys rotation for the last few weeks. Peter Hiku's playing good footy. Tigers, Stafford Toa is still at centre. Isaiah Papali'i is there, but you also got Asu Kepaoa. We talk a lot about him. Utility off the bench. Broncos versus Dolphins. This is at the Gabba, which will be interesting to see rugby league played at the Gabba. Xavier Willison, Waikato's Xavier Willison. He's starting edge forward for the Broncos, and this feels a lot like Nelson Asofa-Solomona playing edge forward, because Willison has primarily been a middle forward. He is massive, and he is going to be very interesting to watch at edge forward for the Broncos, replacing Jordan Ricky. Jordan Ricky's had a bit of an injury blow. They're up against the Dolphins. Marshall King's back for the Dolphins, and that is fantastic. You've got the youngsters, Lemuelu, Valence Tafade, and of course the Bromwich brothers are there as well. Bulldogs versus Knights is all about Leo Thompson. He continues to do a good job for the Knights, and Sea Eagles versus Roosters. I'm not sure, I'm just curious about what happens with Christian Tuipulotu over the rest of the season, and especially Toafafoa Sipley, Kalma Tuolangi. Just curious about their footy with the Sea Eagles, because they won't be short of other teams will want those players. Let me just say that. Roosters, Joey Manu back to centre. He was exceptional in their loss to the Raiders. Joey Manu back to his best footy at centre. Another move here is interesting, given Xavier Willison, given Asofa-Solomona. Nofahu White has been playing through the middle for the Roosters in the last few games. Now he's named to start on an edge. So you've got Xavier Willison and Nofahu White. Nofahu White's from Auckland. I think he's a Bay Roskill junior. They're both middle forwards who have been named to play at edge forward this weekend. They do have experience at edge forward, but their NRL minutes have primarily came through the middle. And you've also got Siwa Wong coming off the bench. This might be his debut game, so watch out for Siwa Wong. He's from, I think he went to Mount Albert Grammar School before being scooped up by the Roosters. He is named on the bench. We've got a lot of really interesting women's sport happening from Aotearoa. We've got the Tall Ferns in the Asia Cup. They had a loss to China, then a victory over Lebanon. Now I believe they are preparing to face the Philippines in the quarterfinal. We've also got the White Ferns are in Sri Lanka. They lost the first ODI to Sri Lanka. They got pretty much hammered. They scored 170 for 5 in 28 overs, and then Sri Lanka chased that down, losing 1 wicket. Chamari Atapatu scored 108 not out with a strike rate of 130, which is exceptional batting from the Sri Lankan skipper. And those are the two biggest things right now. The Black Sticks women have also finished their FIH Pro League European League. Obviously, the Black Sticks men were involved as well. The women they didn't perform too well. I think there was just more losses for those teams. There was a shootout victory. Just trying to pull it up here. I think the men had a shootout victory. No, the men lost to Netherlands. The women had a shootout victory over Germany. So that was good. However, neither of those teams are doing anything in the Pro League. And now their Pro League campaign is basically on pause. And they come back to Aotearoa for some Oceania Cup qualification type of games against Australia, which will be and a very interesting gauge of where those Black Sticks teams are coming up against Australia, because Australia, they're very good at hockey. So the teams that are playing right now, or are playing in the cycle, I rank them, and I've got Tall Ferns, White Ferns, Black Sticks, Women in that order. I think the Tall Ferns are the most interesting team, and they've had an Asia Cup where they've played a lot of very good basketball. Talia Tupaya is draining threes from the halfway line. Penina Davison is one of the best big boppers, big men, big women in Asia Cup. She's in fantastic form. And I'm sensing some similarities between the Tall Ferns and the Warriors with everything we said about the Warriors, how they're playing their rugby league. You can see the plan in place. You can see the tactics. You can see the training and the development and the skill evolution and what they're working on. You can see that when the Warriors are playing rugby league. And I think you can see a lot of it for the Tall Ferns as well. Just they're running what they want to run. They're getting good shots. They've got plans. They've got the right people in the right places. They've got a good balance of talent in their squad as well. And just to continue the comparison, it feels a lot different to what the White Ferns are doing in Sri Lanka. And the White Ferns, in ODI cricket since the start of 2020, they are 12-22. So the White Ferns have lost 22 games since the start of 2020, and they've only won 12. And I want to withhold judgment about the White Ferns. I want to let them get some more experience in these conditions and see what happens in the second and third ODIs and then in the T20 series. But like the dismissals were typically weird and fragile. Like they just find ways to get out. And I talked a lot about the spin bowling quality. Well, guess what? Lee Kasprick didn't play because she's never going to play for the White Ferns again by the looks of it. And they took 1 wicket. Susie Bates went for 11 runs off her over. Hannah Rowe went for 9 runs off her over. Amelia Kerr, 6 overs at 7.6 RPO. Fran Jonas, 5 overs at 6.2 RPO. Leah Tahuhu, 4 overs at 6.5. That's expensive bowling. And I'm sensing a continuation of the White Ferns vibe here. But again, I'm just going to hold fire on that one until they play some more cricket in Sri Lanka. But that is very different to the Tall Ferns and what I'm feeling with the Tall Ferns. The Tall Ferns, everything is kind of just well prepared, well executed. There's a lot of talent. Like the talent in the Tall Ferns is exceptional. A direct question to you is what happened against China? Were China just a powerhouse of the women's basketball? Because that is the game the Tall Ferns lost. They defeated Korea, and then they've defeated Lebanon. But they lost to China. So is China just a powerhouse, or was that like a major slip-up for the Tall Ferns? Am I overstating the funk for the Tall Ferns? What do you reckon?
I mean, the China game, China are a powerhouse in women's basketball. That is true. And also the Tall Ferns had played that very competitive game against South Korea the day before, had a game against Lebanon the day after. It was basically they just played on back-to-back days. So the China game was a little bit of a throwaway in that they'd won against Korea to give themselves the right to effectively play for second spot, and if they could beat Lebanon, who were the lowest ranked team in their group. So it was a little bit of like the eyes were on the prize of the game the next day, and Penina Davidson had played all 40 minutes of the game against Korea. And Talia Tupaya had played through, but did go out for quite a while to get her shoulder strapped after taking a knock in the second quarter against Korea. So neither of them actually suited up for the China game. So there's 2 of your starters didn't play. And there is it is exciting times with the Tall Ferns in terms of the talent that they have and the depth that they have, and getting Charlie Sledger Walker to opt in and play all these games all the time it makes a big difference for them, because you've got a world class player who opponents have to respect, even though Charlize hasn't actually been at her best through these 3 games so far. It was some beautiful flashes in the third quarter against Lebanon, but the first half against Lebanon was pretty slack, and against China she was kind of awful, like in terms of the shooting. Her shooting percentage hasn't been good in any of these games, but that's kind of not the point. It's like she draws that attention, and then they have enough talent. Like that's where it starts from. That's the point of the arrow, and then they have enough talent around to build off of that and to take advantage of, if she's getting the second defender rushing over to guard her, someone else is free. She's a good enough passer to find those people, and they've got people like Tolfin's shooting is definitely a weakness of their team. They've missed a lot of shots in general. Like it's something you saw against Lebanon, is Lebanon clogged the paint to take away Penina Davidson as much as possible, and it was leaving open threes. And I think Ezra McGoldrick actually hit 1 or 2. Talia Tapia hit 6 out of 9 in that game. No one else was really making threes, so that's a factor. Like that's something Lebanon chose to do, is take away the inside stuff and let the Tall Ferns beat them outside, which they did. But it's definitely not the way they prefer to do it. But the 6 3-pointers from Tapia, that was the second game for the Tall Ferns. She was on debut against Korea. She formerly played age grade stuff for Australia, and then played Toihi, I think she must have been as an import when she was playing for Northern Kahu last year. And then since then has switched allegiances. That's massive for the Tall Ferns, because there's your second outside scorer. There's the other person that teams have to respect along with Charlie Sledger Walker. That builds them up so much more. But yeah, they're just in terms of that's the bigger picture stuff of the trajectory they're on, as well as like obviously basketball in general in Aotearoa is on a rise. Like we can see that with the Tall Blacks, we can see that with the Tall Ferns. There's more depth than they've had before. They're picking good young players. Like I think at the end of the China game, there was Grace Hunter is like 2021. I think she comes in and off the bench, one of the lower players in the depth chart from this 12-player squad, just comes in and nails a few 3-pointers at the end of that game. It's garbage time, but it's good. It's showing some of the depth that is there, and let alone players who were unavailable or injured or whatever, because there were a few of those. It's not quite full strength that they've got there. But yeah, as to why they got thrashed by China, it's half of China being amazing, and you could see that from the very start. It's just every Chinese player looked a foot taller than the person they were marking. Sometimes because they were, other times just because they were active and long arms, and the defense wasn't collapsing or struggling in any way. They were dictating the game, and Tall Ferns maybe they did hang in there for a quarter or two, and they could have done better if they'd shot more efficiently. Like they missing contested shots is one thing, but they missed a few layups in there and a few open looks where it's like if they'd been a bit more clinical, they might have stayed in it longer. But China were just better, blew them out in the third quarter, rolled to a 30 plus point victory. But that was the throwaway game. And the Tall Ferns did the important thing in the game before that with a great win against Korea, which I talked about on the variety show. And then, yesterday, excellent win against Lebanon, which puts them through to the crossover phase, which, effectively is quarterfinals. Win that, get a place in the semis. They're second in their group, so they play third in the other group, which is Philippines, which is huge, because if they finish third, which is the difference between not beating Korea and beating Korea. If they finished third in the group, they'd be playing Australia right now, who are hosts. And obviously that doesn't tend to go too well for most Kiwi sporting teams against Australia. And that almost happened anyway, because Korea actually took China to overtime, which I was watching that yesterday being like, I assumed, we beat Lebanon by about 10 points more than Korea beat Lebanon. China thrashed us. I was like, okay, well, China should beat Korea then pretty comfortably. They didn't. They went to overtime, but China managed to squeeze that one out in the end. And if it had gone the other way, if Korea had won, the Tall Ferns would have finished third in a 3-way split with the worst points differential because of the thrashing against China, which obviously Korea avoided and China were responsible for. So it was sneaky there, but they got what they went for. And now if they can beat the Philippines, who are a team probably on a similar level to Lebanon, spot in the semifinals is right there. Make the semifinals, you best ever finish in the Asia Cup for the Tall Ferns at the fourth attempt they've been there, but also arguably more importantly, as well as being able to play for a medal, which they probably won't get because the other teams in the semis are going to be better, but you never know. They might even be playing Korea again in that stage. Um, Arguably more importantly, it keeps them alive in Olympic qualification as well, which is important too.
My favorite thing about the Warriors right now is the passing through the middle. Talked a lot about Fanua Blake, Tohu Harris, Dylan Walker, how they create space, how they attack space in the middle as well as attacking the spaces on the edges. What is your favorite thing about Tall Ferns basketball so far in the Asia Cup? Just a small tactical detail, a play, or some little element of how they're playing basketball.
Well, I wouldn't call it tactical, but I think the reason they stuck in, like, because I said, like, they're not a particularly good shooting team. Even their best scorers aren't particularly good shooters. They'll leave some points on the board now and then. However, the reason they've stayed in games for, it didn't last that long against China, but certainly when they were struggling early on against Lebanon, continuing some of the shooting woes against China, they stuck in there because they defended extremely well. And they defended extremely well against Korea as well, and they managed to score a bunch of points in the first half, gave them a big lead, which they just held on for in the end. But both times, like, the foundation has been all like, because they're less so against Lebanon, but certainly against China and a lot against Korea as well. They're coming up against arguably better athletes, where the guards are faster and the bigs are bigger, and the length of these other teams is something that the Tall Ferns don't necessarily have, certainly not across the board to compete with. But it's just like 1 through 5 locked in kind of thing, and you see that with star players like the Ledger Walkers and Tapia and people like that, Davidson as well. You see that from them, which sets a tone, but you also see it from the role players. Like I think two that stand out of the last couple of games, certainly like Stella Beck, who's starting games but is the one who's least likely to get shots and points, but just plays mad defense the whole time, like hustles for rebounds, does all these. And Taylor Dalton's coming off the bench and is just like 100. She's like Reese Walsh, but without swearing at teammates / referees. It's just 100 miles an hour. She's throwing reverse layups up there, like, and just getting open for 3-pointers that she's mostly missing, but is still getting open and just like hustling across, like not dropping off the assignment on defense and all this stuff. It's throughout the roster. It's very clear that there is a level of hustle here, and it's definitely a very, very Kiwi basketballing trait. And we're seeing the Tall Ferns at a level where, with like, time will tell if because they've had some talented groups in the past for sure. And this is quite a young and experienced one. So it has the potential to become one of their best groups down the line. Charlie Ledger Walker is going to be the best Tall Fern who's ever played. That's set. But as to the overall thing, that's time will tell. But there's definitely the defensive hustle, the energy, the effort, those kind of things. Those little the 1%ers, diving on the loose balls, grabbing. That game against Korea was basically decided by 2 clutch rebounds rather than the scoring. It was I think Crystal Ledger Walker with one, Penina Davidson with the other one. Like, they're winning it with those kind of things, the effort plays, which is very Kiwi basketball. And wherever the team goes from this point, they've got that identity still. Like, that hasn't been shed.
And it's interesting when you think about, like, when you're watching these games, those things stand out. Like, if you're watching rugby league, it's like, when the ball goes past you, are you still engaged? Do you still move your feet? Do you still cover the inside channels? How hard are you running back to the 10-meter line to then set yourself up for the next play the ball? How do you slide across the field? How, like, the classic, how many jerseys are in the frame? Like, those things are very easy to spot in a rugby league game. Basketball, it's a lot of, like, are you chasing around the screen? Are you focused? Like, you can really tune in to how engaged the team is defensively. And it seems like what you're saying, the Tall Ferns, a lot of those effort areas, a lot of the intangibles and just the mana stuff that comes with defense, it's there. And like you're also saying that they might be a smaller team, like they give up height to other teams, but that doesn't stop them working on the court. It doesn't stop them working to help out their mate, their teammate. And same idea with the rugby league. This was a big idea through the origin period, was Queensland moving your feet. And Billy Slater selecting players who kept moving their feet. How do you stop Penrith? How do you stop the New South Wales style, which is very similar to the Penrith style, which is actually very similar to the Warriors style, as we've talked about? You got to keep moving your feet because there's a lot of changing angles and the ball's moving everywhere. So can you move your feet? And I think that's actually a simple idea to take into basketball as well. Defensively, are you standing still? Or do you keep moving your feet? Do you keep engaged with the player you're marking? And I think, no surprises, the Kiwi basketball team does that very well. We've got, I don't know if there's much more to say about the White Ferns, but it is a massive Friday. The Warriors are playing. The New South Wales Cup game, I think, is on TV as well. New Zealand Tall Ferns versus Philippines is basically 7 p.m. Friday evening. And the White Ferns, their second ODI, 4:30 p.m. Friday afternoon as well. So a big old Friday afternoon / evening of Kiwi sport. Everything I was saying there about the Tall Ferns, I'm just not really seeing it from the White Ferns at the moment. And that's just something to track with the White Ferns as they progress. I had those rankings there, the Tall Ferns, White Ferns, then Black Sticks women. Two other things coming up which I think are going to enter that chat, are going to enter that equation, are the Football Ferns and the World Cup, and also Women's Rugby League. We'll put Women's Rugby League on the back burner for now, other than I'm incredibly optimistic and positive and generally hyped for NRLW, just because, like, boil it down, what's the most important thing about NRLW coming up? There are as many new players as there are returning players. That is the most important thing ahead of NRLW for the New Zealand players. So there's an influx of new players to NRLW, which is fantastic.
And that's without a Warriors team as well, which,
exactly,
in a year or two down the line, you're probably going to add another 20 odd.
For sure. And now we've got the Football Ferns. They've got their World Cup coming up. Just completely, I don't even need your response to this, but I did tap in with what the Megan Rapinoe vibe. And I was curious because, like, there seems to be this big thing in America to make women's sport as big as men's sport. And, like, USA Women's, they're the best football team in the world, absolute dynasty, amazing excellence. But they try so hard to make it like, America, you need to care about us. I think here in New Zealand, we just we're talking about the women's cricket, women's basketball, women's rugby league, women's football. Women's sport in New Zealand, I think, is light years ahead of women's sport in America. I don't think we're quite at Australia, but the quality and variety, like in New Zealand, a sport that was traditionally played by men is now equal with women. The sports we're talking about right now, our big four, basketball, cricket, rugby league, and football, women's elements of those sports are just as big as the men's sport. Where you can't play women's NFL. Right? Like, women's baseball is
You can't play women's baseball either. Yeah, it's a different sport.
It's so strange.
You have to throw underarm.
And it's like, oh, we need to care about women's sports, so it's just women's basketball, women's NBA. And, like, there's some very weird stuff around the women's football team, but it does seem like, because Megan Rapinoe, she was talking up the World Cup, like, people need to check in, it's going to be amazing, blah, blah, blah. It's just like women's sport, women's sport here in New Zealand is as big as men's sport. It's just like, I don't know, it's quite a strange thing to observe from the outside looking in with the football stuff, but that's just a small rant from myself, which is interesting because you told me the Football Ferns squad Shout out to the ferns. We got the tall ferns, we got the white ferns, we got the football ferns. I do love a fern, so shout out to the ferns, the plants, the ferns around Aotearoa and the world. We got a football ferns World Cup squad coming up, and if I'm to inject football ferns and women's rugby league into these rankings, I've got football ferns ahead of women's rugby league, but again, that's just my bias. Oh, that's me being aware of my bias because I really want to put rugby league ahead of the football ferns, but the World Cup is a major factor there. Right now, I've got the tall ferns at the top of the charts because I'm just enjoying their basketball. Do you have any football ferns squad ideas, leanings, just stuff you're curious about prior to the squad being announced? I imagine you will write something about it for the email newsletter tomorrow and then send that out tomorrow evening, assuming the squad is named during the day, so you can read about it in our email newsletter via Substack. And you'll do a full preview for our website, theniche-case.com. But here on Thursday, is there just something you're thinking about with the football ferns squad? Yeah.
The things I'll be looking out for when it gets named, there's a couple, because Erin Naylor's been out for several months now with an injury for her club team in Sweden. She would definitely be in the squad. She'd be the third choice goalkeeper, I think. She's sort of dropped from first to third in the last couple of years, as Verkessen has been just outstanding for the football ferns whenever she's played, and Anna Leit's probably the player with the biggest potential, and happens to be a goalkeeper as well. So but Naylor would still be there in the top three. But however, that depends on how she is recovering. And frankly, based on some reports I've heard, Google Translate's doing a lot of heavy lifting here, so you can't necessarily trust it for sure. But based on some of the stuff I've read out of Sweden, it doesn't sound like they're expecting her back till after the World Cup. And maybe that's just because they expected her to be at the World Cup. I don't know. Like I'm saying, translations, things get lost. But if she's out injured, then that just means Brianna Edwards, fresh off a strong season, which she improved so much from start to finish for the Wellington Phoenix, she'll just come in as the third choice goalkeeper, which would be a hell of an experience there. I'm curious about, because one of the interesting things there with Brianna Edwards is she has one Kiwi parent and an Australian parent, I think, but raised in Australia, but came over to play for the Phoenix and then switched allegiances, went to the Under-20 World Cup. One of a few players who've switched allegiances from Australia to New Zealand in women's football in the last couple of years, because Indy Riley's another one, Ellie Green's another one. I don't think Ellie Green will make the squad. I do think Indy Riley will, but I think she's, she will have needed to have done, we don't know what's gone on in the last 6 weeks of training camp, but she would have needed to put in a good effort in the training camp in order to consolidate that. So there's a couple of those ones about some of these players who have switched allegiances, whether they'll actually make the team. And then the other one is Annalie Longo, who's been recovering from a long-term, an ACL injury. And it was an ACL injury suffered a couple months after Rhea Percival's one. And Rhea Percival only just got back to play off the bench in the last couple of weeks of the WSL season for Spurs. However, what we have learned from Percival's injury is that it wasn't just an ACL tear, it was also a meniscus tear, and one of the worst ones that her doctor had seen. So it does sound like she probably needed a longer recovery time than Longo. And Longo has been in the what do you call it? She's been in the training camp working up. It's just she's also not a professional player having the benefit of the Tottenham Hotspur medical staff or anything like that. Very much the grassroots recovery kind of thing. So is she fit enough to make the squad? Because if she is, she'll be there. If she's not, that brings in someone like maybe, I don't know, a Daisy Cleverley, who might otherwise be the 24th option in the 23 squad. A few things like that. Will Millie Clegg make the cut? I suspect so. Because I think you'd rather have extra attacking options and extra defensive options off the bench in the World Cup like this. But that might also mean, again, someone like, I don't know, Grace Neville, who swapped over from England to Aotearoa, might not make the 23 player cut as well. I find it hard looking at the group to find room for both Mackenzie Berry and Kate Taylor and also Liz Anton. It might just be one of those three young A-League defenders who can make the cut. I would lean towards Barry personally, but see how that goes. Like there's a few of these ones, but I think we mostly know who's going to be in the group. Like we're, at least 18 of those 23 players are set in stone, and we can be pretty confident about exactly who those players will be. And those are all the starting players and whatnot. There were a couple of other injuries, like Liv Chance was recovering from an injury. Percival's fitness is obviously something to keep aware of, but I think those are all things that should have recovered by now. And yeah, we'll see what that squad looks like tomorrow, because it seems like the Football Ferns have been one of the last teams to name their World Cup squad. Everyone else seems to have been up there. Some teams named them 3 or 4 weeks ago. Other teams have been naming them throughout this past week before. Like there's been most of the nations have come out earlier with their groups. Seems like the Football Ferns are giving themselves as much time as possible to make some of these tough decisions. So we'll see what that looks like. We'll see what the 23 comes out with. I did write a thing a few weeks ago about 6 weeks ago, predicting a squad, and I'm still looking at that. Other than the Naylor injury and I addressed the Longo stuff in the article. Other than that, I'm still pretty. I wouldn't personally change anything from what I had there, apart from whether or not Aaron Naylor is fit to play.
Just save the context and just keep it focused on your intuition here. My weird rankings of women's sports things in Aotearoa right now: Tall Ferns, Football Ferns, NRLW, White Ferns, Black Sticks, Women. Do you have a different order?
Well, I know you mentioned your bias before. I do think there's an argument to say that the NRL stuff could be first ahead of the Tall Ferns. But it would be it might be a bit presumptuous to say that now rather than once the NRLW starts.
We'll check in the future. Like this is right now.
Sure. And for that reason, yeah, probably lean very similar. I find it hard to get a gauge on the Football Ferns because we know they've been underperforming, but we also know there's clearly I think there's more depth than they've had ever. I think there is the opportunities with the Wellington Phoenix team and more professional players playing overseas. We had 4 players in the WSL in England last year. It was pretty handy. There are 2 New Zealanders. One of them's retired internationally, but there's 2 New Zealanders who have captained teams in the NWSL in America. Abby Erceg's not currently a captain. She's like the vice captain because she's been traded to a new team this year. But still, there's a clear trajectory on the upwards there, but also it hasn't translated into Football Ferns wins yet. So I find it hard to gauge exactly where they're at, because I think everything that's come to this point is in service of the World Cup. Everything's been preparation for the World Cup. So I'm not sure we can judge them until the World Cup, until we've seen what they do at the World Cup. So right now I'd be a little cautious. I'd have them about the same. In the middle of that group, I think. I would probably go Tall Ferns, then NRLW, pushing them very close and give it a couple months and see how we're feeling about that. Then same deal with Football Ferns, and then the White Ferns. And I can't claim to follow the hockey as closely as you do, but I'll trust your opinion on them. Them coming in, rounding it out.
It is a weird one. The Football Ferns NRLW, that's based on the upcoming event hype.
Yeah.
And that event hype is worthy of a higher ranking than the White Ferns, who are currently playing cricket. I'm doubling down on that just because they've
had a couple of their events as well.
Well, it's just them playing games right now. They don't have the same talent. They don't have the stuff we're seeing from the Tall Ferns. They don't have the overwhelming amount of talent that I said with the NRLW. There's nothing in the White Ferns playing cricket right now that is as exciting as a upcoming World Cup for the Football Ferns. So that's just something to note for the White Ferns as well. Let's finish with our little NBL corner. We've got a solid top four, and we've had a solid top four all season. Tuatara, Nuggets, Bulls, and Rams. That's basically been the top four all season. I feel like we've talked about all four teams plenty throughout the season because they have been top four teams. But as you said, I think it was the variety show. This is about top six for playoff finals basketball. And we've got a clear fifth place with the Wellington Saints, who are doing well at the moment. Then you've got the next five teams all have 5 points, and they're basically chasing one spot. They're chasing that sixth spot. Southland and Hawke's Bay have played an extra game compared to the other teams, so that could be a factor. For this week's NBL corner, let's just open up. What do you find most interesting for this week's basketball? We do have a full slate of games coming up.
Yeah, and 3 more rounds overall, and obviously some teams have will have rounds where they play 2 games. That's been the case all season. So there's, I just find that wild how there's the 5 bottom teams competing for one spot all have the same points tally. They all have 5 wins. As you mentioned, Southland Hawke's Bay have played an extra game, but also Giants, Jets, Airs, those doubleheader weeks, that their remaining doubleheader week each, likely to involve games against the top 4 or 5 teams as well. So that's just because those other teams have played an extra game doesn't mean that that's necessarily a huge advantage if one of these other teams, Nelson, for example, gets blown out, ruins by like the Tortada or something. I don't know who they have to play coming up, but there's points differential is likely to be a factor there, and having already played that extra game and not having the potential to worsen that thing might actually end up being a benefit for those other 2 teams. But yeah, it's wild, man, because that could go in any direction. I mean, the bottom place team is Taranaki, and I actually think Taranaki is coming into some quite decent form at the moment. I've enjoyed watching their last couple games. There was, what did they do last week? They beat Southland 94-90, and it was the week before they ran Wellington close and then beat Manawatu the game before that. So they've been doing some nice things. I don't know if you've watched much of them lately, but if you do happen to catch them this week, and they're on tonight, in fact, they're playing against the Tortada, so that's a tough game.
Home game though, home game.
It is a home game, so that's nice. And I think Tobias Cameron's out for that game, but definitely keep an eye on if you happen to catch that. Carlin Davidson is so much fun to watch. He's the bounciest player in the league. He's tall and skinny, but he's like he plays on a trampoline. It's nuts.
Bouncier than Charlie Dalton.
Yeah, I reckon so. He's got
the white boy kind of
yes.
half Pakia, half Palangi braids, cornrows going on. So he's I'm going to claim that because I brought up Carlin Davidson last week and we sparked a discussion because he's part of that kind of long wing Kiwi
definitely
pocket that it does have Dalton, and you make Walter Brown for the Canterbury Rams. So, but he's the kind of the most like highlight really player in the NBL, would you say?
He's certainly up there. He gets some impressive dunks and the alley-oops and stuff, just over the rim kind of things, because he's bouncy. He's got those trampoline heels. He's also someone who spent, I think, a couple months out in like California, including crossing over the very start of the season. That's why he's joined midway through, sort of working out post-college stuff, trying to impress some draft scouts, which obviously wasn't going to end up in him getting drafted, because you think how many universities there are across America, how many people finish each year, and then you add an international prospects, and there's like 60 players to get drafted at the end of it. It's unlikely, but you build up sort of. That's why I thought the most interesting thing, Kiwi perspective wise, other than if you want to claim Mojave King and Ryan Repair, of the draft is less the draft and more like what happens after that. For example, Sam Wardenberg has got a gig with, I think it was Minnesota, to go do some summer league. So there'll hopefully be other opportunities. Flynn Cameron feels like another guy who he's actually in Melbourne now. So maybe that's, maybe he's just focusing on that. But he feels like another one who might be someone who might get an extended invite. Carlin Davison is potentially in that bag as well. If not, I would love to see him on at least given a development player role with an NBL team because in Australia because he feels like again like Walter Brown's got one of those. Uh, there's like Hiram Harris is playing in for Perth on a full contract. It's definitely an avenue. And I wrote about this the other day, like last week. I picked a player from each team who I thought might have some potential to play at that higher level. Davison was my pick from the years.
What are you seeing from? You've talked a lot about McRae for the Nelson Giants. He's someone to watch as they take on Manawatu this weekend. I think it's just the one game for the Nelson Giants. And the Wellington Saints, they are resurgent at the moment. They face the Hawke's Bay Hawks. Is it just kind of Liafa and Tommy V are the most impactful players there? Or is there someone else who has impressed you with the Wellington Saints in their resurgent run up the NBL ladder?
Saints, I mean, I'm not sure if Toe Smith Milner's back, but before he hurt his ankle, he was just draining 3-pointers
I'm
all of a
pretty sure he
sudden, which
played
was
last weekend,
pretty cool.
last round.
He might have. I didn't watch them last week, so I'll have to. No, yes, he did. He came back off the bench. That was his first game back, and he hit three pointers out of 6 attempts. So there you go. Yeah, he's been big for them. Liafa obviously coming back is big. Vodanovic has had a couple nice games. I assume he'll see out the season. The Saints are that in between team because there's the clear top four, there's the clear bottom five, and then there's like the Saints in between who sort of fluctuate. But what was the game you mentioned? Nelson and Manawatu as well. I'll highlight that one because that's the only game between two bottom five teams this week. Everyone else, all the other bottom five teams, all on the same points, are playing a team above them on the ladder. Whereas that one, Nelson versus Manawatu, two teams both on 10 points, both on 5 wins. Very, very, very important areas there.
Beauty. That is the niche cast for this week. Big up yourself, love yourself, kia kaha, stay beautiful, church.